Okay, here we go. Max Wild has the first question out of the gate. He says, "Hey, Bill, glad to have you back. Glad to be back, everybody. Max especially. Good to see you. What I'd like you to focus on in year 2 is subverting the liberal narrative in the pop culture. Also, something that you talk about regarding the Hollywood culture that seeks to snuff out the voice of morality, I think needs to be pointed out more often. How pervasive and substantial is immorality throughout Hollywood these days?" Well, Max, as I say, you open the window just off to my left here, and you can see the giant Eye of Mordor. It's directly on the hill above this office. I get out all the time. Every single time I'm out of town, the one question I get by a factor of 5 over anything else is, why are you still there? Why are you not in someplace sensible like Texas or something? And I tell people, I have to live here because this is where the media comes from. It's where the pop culture comes from, and the pop culture is everything. It's everything. It's not one of the pieces on the board. It's what all the pieces of the board swim in. So, although I did have to say, I had a kind of a pithy turn of that phrase just last weekend. A couple days ago, somebody asked me, "Why do you live in Los Angeles?" And I said, "Well, if you're a volcanologist, you got to live under the volcano, right?" So that's it. I live under the volcano, and it's awful, Max. It's just, you have no idea. You really have no idea just how awful it is in terms of the morality of this place. I could tell you stories that would curl your hair, but not in public. Really shocking. The bottom line is, in Hollywood, in terms of getting deals made, and Jeremy Boring pointed this out because he had a lot more real-world examples, every deal is made in flesh. There are just assumptions that are made. There are, and there are not just assumptions. There are just transactions. It's just assumed, and your liberalism is assumed. Jeremy's been to pitch meetings where people said, "Love your script. I'm real interested in developing it, and how much can we put you down for the Obama campaign?" That kind of thing. So, Max, it's bad out here, and the good news is that it's not bad out in the rest of the country. It's at least not as bad, and so movies with some morality in them do pretty well. The trick is, how do you get the morality in there without putting a cyst around the message so that nobody else gets it? That's going to be the challenge, and that's going to be especially a challenge for me moving forward. We've had the guts of this conversation before. I think it's probably a good conversation to have next week on the chair. And the nice thing about the set over there is we have 2 chairs, so we'll get some guests in here. And Andrew Clavin and Zoe are a couple of highly ranked people who are, I think, we're going to have early. Jeremy has a lot to say about show business too. But one of the problems we're going to have, I'm not going to get into it now, I've gotten into it a little bit, is we have to, I feel, I don't say we, I have to go after young people. I have to go get people who we don't have already. If we don't go after people who we don't have already, then we're going to lose this thing. And in order to go after those people, you have to go after them in their language. You have to bring them into the tent. And that works for me because I speak that language. And that language is considerably more profane than the language I use here and the language I often use and I like to use in my kind of higher self. And I'm not going to make these movies unwatchable. I will put out a PG version of everything I do. I'll put out a PG cut, which will, release for people who have the problems with the, extreme language or nudity. And I can't do anything that gets me an R because an R is a kiss of death. But with that said, I've had a lot of sharp discussions about this with people, and where I'm coming down with this is, I'm going to make movies that I think young people are going to see, and I want to make it look like the movies that they already see, and I don't want them to think that these movies are any different. The things that these movies have in common is that they're not political movies. I want people who have their own weapons and their own cars fighting against the government. That's big bad problems, and also common sense resistance. And if I can do that, then I don't have to worry about the rest of it. There's an example I've used, and I don't know if I've used it recently on the show. I haven't done a show recently, so I guess I haven't. But I use this quite a bit when I take this question out in public. On speaking engagements, there's a scene that the emotional center of Common Sense Resistance, which is movie 2, where this attractive guy who we kind of gotten to like is living in this world, and he's got a kind of a crappy apartment, kind of crappy food, kind of crappy, transportation, public transportation, and it's set in the future, and he's recruited by these powerful forces, and he then is offered better food and a pretty girlfriend and all this other stuff, but he decides to abandon that. And he goes, lives under the city, and people are shooting at him. He's covered in filth, and he's literally like eating rats on a spit, in an underground cavern, and his friends are fighting and dying for him. And the emotional climax of the movie, the emotional center of the movie anyway, is where he takes a bayonet and without anesthesia cuts a 1-inch, 2-inch incision in his arm, pulls the chip out of his forearm, smashes it against the concrete with the handle of the bayonet. And the point I try to make when I tell this to people is, when you see somebody do that, it doesn't matter what the politics are, because you're on that guy's side. You see a person give up freedom, or give up security, and give up safety, and give up food and comfort to go and live in a world of danger and adventure and risk his life for a cause. You're with that guy. And when he volunteers to suffer that kind of physical pain, unbearable physical pain, in order to achieve something, you're with him. So is he fleeing a world of evil corporations, and is he joining the socialist underground? He's going to join the descendants of Che Guevara and Fidel Castro? Or is he fleeing a socialist world and he's going to join underground patriots? Doesn't matter. People still with the guy. So the power of the story is the thing that matters. It's the power of that story. And once you understand the power of the action of him cutting this chip out of his arm so that he can live off the grid with his brothers in arms who are fighting and dying for him against this world of boredom and mediocrity that he used to live in, you understand that people are going to be on the side of this guy. And whatever side he's on, the audience is going to be on. So that's where the politics comes in. Turns out he's fighting for freedom against a giant socialist state. But if I say he's fighting for freedom against a giant socialist state, it actually weakens it. It's much stronger to show people things than to tell them things. And I am particularly bad at this because I'm way, way, way too talky. So a lot of what I have to do with that movie and with all these movies is to take it down to the actions. With that said, Big Bad Problems is a horror movie. It's a science fiction adventure comedy, and it's fun. And everybody runs around and they have a great time, and there's dialogue is very snappy, and people are real attractive. And the only politics we really get into there is when these two brothers, 16-year-old brother and probably a 28, 29, 30-year-old brother, get the two brothers run into their closets as their dad's turned into one of these horrible monsters. They run into their closets, they grab their AR-15s and their sidearms, and they run outside and they hop into a giant RV, and the RV is filled with all kinds of electronic equipment that you get from Brookstone and whatever else, and they've got their own drones, they've got their own Air Force, they've got their own surveillance, they're doing countermeasures against government drones, they're doing all kinds of cool things. And what I've really got in Big Bad Problems, although you'd never hear anybody talk about it this way, is you've got a militia. You've got individual citizens who are fighting this alien invasion on their own, despite the fact that the government is in fact on the side of the aliens, trying to present enough of a threat for them to have the power to step in and take over. So I'm not saying Republicans or Democrats. I'm just saying here's some good-looking, attractive people using guns and their own cars to defend themselves and their friends against this alien threat. And I think we got some question about that coming up, about why Hunger Games is so popular. So anyway, that's basically it, Max. The morality of the thing is kind of a two-sided question. If you're talking about morality in the sense of no nudity and no profanity, I'm going to have some nudity and some profanity. And I'll produce a version which I'd be happy to distribute that has the nudity and the profanity cut out. But if you're trying to reach 15, 16-year-old boys, you got to have PG-13 level stuff. PG-13 is right where I want to be. So that's a decision I've pretty much made, and I think I'm going to stick to it. And I know I'm going to lose some people over that, and I feel bad about that. I genuinely do. I lose some sleep over that, but some people are going to have a real problem with it, and I'm going to have to decide whether or not that's more important than reaching 16-year-old boys, 17-year-old boys. And in my mind, there's a lot of people doing what I'm doing now. And nobody's doing what we need to be doing, which is making those kind of movies so that kids come out of these movies, a date movie, and they're fired up and it's fun and they had a great time as an adventure. They didn't even realize they got a political message. That's how we got into this trouble. That's how we're going to get out. So moving on.